President Biden gave a nice little parting gift to President Trump before he even takes office by ramping up the potential for escalation when he authorized the use of long-range missiles. Apparently, Keir Starmer of the UK has followed suit, and now Storm Shadow missiles have allegedly been used also on the ground in Russia, deep inside there. An interesting interview yesterday on Fox News. Trey Yin, who gave this interview, to his credit, he actually asked one of the hard questions.
Last week, you criticized German Chancellor Olaf Scholz for speaking on the phone with Russian President Putin. Why?
According to my opinion, that is really a Pandora's box. Putin's isolation is also the pressure against him. We fight not only by weapons, as you properly said, by diplomacy. Diplomacy is so important, and only diplomacy can end this war.
But, sir, how can you have diplomacy without talking?
No, we're talking. But after you know what will be soon. What Chancellor got after phone call? Nothing new.
And so your position right now is that Western leaders should not be speaking with Putin?
Intelligence of Western leaders, they had contact on the level of intelligence during this war with Russian side. They had a lot. Europe, United States, everybody they had. But it was not, against the political isolation of Putin. It was on the level of intelligence. Why? Because you have not recognized Putin as the president, because he is a killer. Otherwise, you will destroy this isolation, political isolation.
Now, you were just talking in regards to the Middle East about how important it was for diplomacy and find other means to talk things to get American interest short of bullying and military force. But now then, if Olaf Scholz, apparently recognizing that his own domestic political situation is going wobbly is an understatement, but he actually reached out and talked to Putin. And then Yingst asked him, well, if you're not talking, how do you even reach a diplomatic solution? I'm not sure actually what that meant, his response here, but it seems very unhinged from reality.
Well, I consider Ukraine to be essentially a heart patient lying on a table that's on life support. And without the life support, the patient dies instantly. Instead of recognizing that and perhaps looking into a heart transplant and some radical surgery, Biden and his friends want to give Ukraine a haircut and a shave and say, see, everything's better now. These weapons that we're talking about are not going to change anything. There are too few of them. Their destructiveness is substantial, but not significant enough that the Russians are going to stop doing what they're doing. In fact, if anything, I think they're going to trigger a very rapid Russian advance and the complete destruction of whatever remains of Ukraine west of the Dnieper. I think it's going to have the opposite effect on Russia. So it's a very stupid thing to do. And it's not going to benefit the people that live in Ukraine who are suffering. And what is the population down to now? 16, 18 million from an original population of almost 40 million. Everyone's left. How many dead is anybody's guess. They've had at least 1.5, maybe 2 million casualties, of which at least 700,000 are dead Ukrainian soldiers. No one wants to tell the truth. We're standing in front of a mountain of lies. And everyone is trying to dress this thing up and make it look good. Putting a sheet over it and putting up signs, happy days are here again, isn't going to change the disaster that's staring us in the face. But this administration is kind of interesting because in many ways they're teaching us something. These globalist neocons who want to transform the world, destroy countries, eliminate national identity, destroy borders and so forth, and create some sort of amorphous mass of mindless workers doing their bidding, has been rejected. This is rejected everywhere. Nobody wants it. But they don't like democracy. They hate democracy. When they use the word democracy, they think of something along the lines of what Lenin thought. Democracy is fine as long as I win all of the elections. Democracy is fine as long as I count the votes. Democracy works when it serves me. That's the attitude for the people in Washington. That's the attitude of people in London and Paris, Berlin. The left doesn't like this. The globalists hate this. And so they're subverting it. Remember all the time, how many times have we listened to people in Berlin or Washington or any of these places? We must protect our democracy. Mr. Trump is a threat to democracy. No, Mr. Trump is not a threat to democracy. He was just democratically elected. They don't like it. They don't want it because we are rejecting them. You know, Solzhenitsyn in his book, The Gulag Archipelago, was trying to explain to people why these massive concentration camps existed inside the Arctic Circle up in Russia, in Siberia, that killed millions long before World War II broke out, long before Hitler had even thought about concentration camps. These camps contained millions, and they simply worked people to death and tried to starve them to death. And it was very easy because if you're living in an area that goes down to 9 below every night and rises up to 25 or 30 degrees during the day, if you're lucky, you're not going to last long if you're being worked hard and fed very little. And what Solzhenitsyn was trying to do is say the reason these camps existed was because communism, socialism, does not work. And the only answer, if you want real socialism in a dictatorship of the proletariat, is to kill people, to imprison people, to punish people. That's what it's all about. And that's what the Biden regime wants to do with anyone they don't like. That's why they throw the Bill of Rights under the bus. That's why they imprison people when there's no justification for long prison sentences. But on the other hand, release criminals they are confident will go out and attack American citizens who actually obey the law and pay taxes is another piece of evidence for the larger contempt in which they hold both the people they govern, as well as this thing we call a republic, which is based on democratic processes. That's what's most disturbing about all of this. Now a man has been elected despite them, and he is committed, I think, to restoring that republic. We'll see how far he gets.
And you know, another enabler of this, which given our profession, our past professions, I find very disturbing. Now, you're a combat veteran. You were highly decorated in Desert Storm. You were also a cavalry squadron commander, and you fought in training exercises against the very kinds of Russian forces that in certain senses we have today. So you got a lot of experience at this, and so you're making all these observations based on significant combat experience. But then check out this. This is what, after this announcement was made that the Biden administration had authorized this, watch all these 4-star and 3-star generals back him up.
It's the right decision. This should have happened 2 years ago.
I think it was a smart move. They're giving an advantage to Ukraine.
This is a step in the right direction. We've got to give Ukraine more leverage.
I think it's a very big deal. Wish it had come many, many months earlier.
Man, what in the world? I mean, how could any of these guys, with the exception of possibly Bolton, actually think that this can make a difference when you have 3 years of wreckage to prove that it doesn't?
A couple of things. First, look at their sources of income. Who is paying them? Where do their paychecks come from? Setting aside the federal pensions, which are quite bloated, by the way, that they get. 4 stars are paid full salary, all benefits for the rest of their lives when they retire. On top of that, they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars and becoming millionaires. Why? Who's paying them? So that's number one. The public needs to wake up and start looking at where the money's coming from. That helps to explain the positions they're taking. Secondly, I don't think most of them really understand the implications because they cling to this notion that Russia is weak, Russia is incapable, and Russia can be bullied. The third is very disappointing. They have taken such strident positions over the last almost 3 years, Dan, and you and I have listened to them, guaranteeing Ukrainian victory. All 3 of those men, those general officers, have come out periodically and talked about, oh, the Ukrainians are winning. We just need to reinforce it. We need to support them. They're winning, they're winning, they're winning. That was always a lie. It was a lie from the very beginning. Ukraine never had any chance to win anything against Russia. The disparity in size, capability, resources, population, all of those things played a major role. They were the same people who said, oh, we can cut Russia off from resources. We can cut them out of the business sector. We'll destroy them economically. None of that happened. They have an abundance of resources, have always had an abundance of resources. And that's what they've got today. And the world is doing business with Russia, whether we like it or not. So all of these are sort of a string of fairy tales that they have been telling. And to expect them now to say, come forth and say, you know, I guess I was wrong. Ukraine is destroyed. Millions of people have lost their homes. Unknown numbers have died. Millions of casualties. Perhaps it's best that we reach a peace agreement now with the Russians. That's impossible because it's all about them. If you've stridently lied this long, told that many fairy tales, how do you back away? How do you retreat from these outrageous policy stances that you've taken? This happened to Lyndon Johnson. You know, when we had the Tet Offensive, and a lot of people will remember this. Remember in the months leading up to it, the 6 months before the Tet Offensive, Westmoreland, who was the four-star commander-in-chief, McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, President Johnson, were running all over the country talking about everything is better. We've turned the corner. Things are getting better. You heard the same thing in Iraq. Is Iraq today in any way, shape, or form a friendly or a satellite state of America? Our forces live there inside tiny bases, fortresses, to stay alive. They're there over the objections of everybody who lives in the country. Is Afghanistan a brilliant example of what our intervention produces? And Syria, we're clinging to an oil field that is pumping oil that is then sent down to Israel. Is that helping us? Is that helping Israel? Because all we're doing is making sure that Israel can continue to wage this offensive war, because Israel is not defending itself. It's attacking everyone. No one is going to tell the truth. The truth is simply unacceptable. And the sad part is that the mass media is a co-conspirator in this whole process. They're not interested in the truth either. They're on the wrong side of these issues. Morality plays no role. The truth plays no role. That's where we are.
You know, Doug, I do have to slightly chuckle here because John Bolton, I showed just a short clip of that in that montage that Gary put together a second ago. But when you look at another section of that, he unwittingly actually did tell the truth. Check this out. Coming up soon. Oh, I'm sorry. Had a little loading issue. Gary's telling me
that. All right.
It was ironic because he's going to lay out here his complaints about why the missiles didn't come in earlier, and he's going to lay out this long list of things which is going to somewhat undercut his actual argument. Here we go.
For this 2.5 years, Russia has largely deterred the United States and NATO from providing adequate assistance to Ukraine on a strategic basis. It's been one long public debate after another, going back to, shall we supply ATACMS to the Ukrainians at all? First it's no, then there's a debate, then there's yes. Should we supply the Ukrainians Abrams tanks? First it's no, then there's a long debate, then it's yes. Should we supply the Ukrainians with F-16s? First it's no, then there's a long debate, and it's yes. Now, can we allow the Ukrainians to use ATACMS inside Russia? After a long debate, now it's yes. But it's 2 months until Donald Trump is inaugurated, and I think there's little doubt what's going to happen here. Aid to Ukraine is most likely to diminish significantly.
What he explains there is that, yeah, even though Biden did delay a lot of the stuff, they got the Abrams tanks, the Stryker vehicles, the armor personnel carriers, the ATACMS, the HIMARS, the Patriots, and then the F-16s, and none of it made any difference. And so why do they keep clinging to the fiction that one more thing might actually change something?
Well, there's something else that explains what he's describing, and we need to understand this. There were plenty of people behind the scenes in the intelligence and military arenas who were telling members of the Senate and House privately, and also informing the president and his national security team that Ukraine could not win for the reasons that I cited earlier. And they were very reluctant to keep giving these weapon systems to people that could not easily assimilate them. We've talked about that before. You know, armies are not shake and bake propositions. Neither are navies or air forces. It takes many, many, many years to develop forces. When Yamamoto agreed to the Pearl Harbor attack, his assumption was that not only would the carriers be there, but the real purpose of the attack on Pearl Harbor was to kill as many of the United States Navy's officers as possible, because he understood that the officer corps in the Navy was absolutely vital to the effectiveness of that force. If you could kill most of those officers, it would take us years to train and educate and produce new generations of capable naval officers. I think people were trying to tell them, Ukrainians can't do this as fast as you would like them to do. It's impossible. And you know what the answer was, Dan? Well, that's all right. We're harming Russia. Remember? Yeah. We're harming Russia. And when people were asked, what's our purpose? Was our purpose to help Ukraine become this glittering example of liberal democracy and flourish as a free, independent state? If we'd been interested in that, we'd have signed up for neutrality. Look at Austria. Is Austria a liberal democratic state? Yes. Look at Finland. Is it a liberal democratic state? Yes. They were both neutral. Neutrality was a healthy experience for both of those states. So they didn't care about Ukraine or its people. They didn't care how many millions of people were driven out, or how many millions suffered, or how many millions were killed and wounded. It was of no consequence to them. They were all about harming Russia. And that was folly from day one, for all the reasons that we discussed. How do you take on a nation the size of Russia with over 140 million people that is sitting on the abundance of resources that they have and has a long and distinguished history of resisting invasion, resisting attack? How are you going to dominate them? These questions were of no consequence. We're harming Russia. Well, we haven't harmed Russia. We've done some damage, but Russia has been transformed by this experience into the most powerful military state in Europe, probably in Eurasia. And people keep talking about China. China has vast reserves of manpower and a large industrial base, but the Russians have a long martial history. China has no long history of invading other people's countries and setting up governments. That's not what they did. They are not offensively minded as a people, never have been. The Japanese are, we are, the Germans are, the British are, but not the Chinese. But they look to the Russians for leadership in the military sphere. Why? Because the Russians are competent. And they've demonstrated that despite all the problems that happen when any army that has lived effectively in peacetime for decades is suddenly asked to go to war. You knew that from your experience. Everything did not go swimmingly in 1990 and 91. Most units just stumbled in the way they had done it in Germany. We did not. We fundamentally adapted and changed everything we did to accommodate the new environment. We fought differently. That's a tough thing for armies to do, Dan. You don't do it on the fly. And it was impossible for Ukraine to ever build the kind of force that they needed to fight against Russia. And these people
I'll just tag it, double team on what you said, that the only reason we were able to make that shift in 1991 is because we already were very well trained and experienced at every level all the way through, so that it was easy to move that over into a new dynamic. But if you don't have that, if everything's flat and nobody has experience except for what they've been grabbed off the street, they're never going to be able to perform that way ever. And unfortunately, that what to you and me is a basic understanding is totally oblivious to most of the other people. And that is a big problem for the United States, which, well, let's just hope that could get fixed in a new administration. A lot of people in the West are using lots of just nonsense and making all kinds of ridiculous claims about what these missiles can do and what may happen and force Russia into all this stuff. But somebody who's not fooled about any of this is Sergei Lavrov.
Long-range missiles are going to be applied from Ukraine into Russian territory it will also mean that they are operated by American experts, military experts. And we will be taking this as a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia, and we'll react accordingly.
And so far, at least what's been reported, that I want to say that we're trying to piece things together, but by reports, 18 ATACMS missiles have so far been fired, and presumably only one of them has actually hit a target. And then some number of Storm Shadow missiles were fired today, and we actually haven't gotten any battle damage assessment on that. But it appears that nothing major has happened so far, so it doesn't seem like Russia's hand may be forced. But based on what Lavrov said there, what are your concerns over the next 60 days?
I think we're going to see the use of large numbers of Iskander missiles carrying a 1,200, 1,500-pound warhead, hypersonic missiles, similar to what we saw, I think it was several weeks ago, if not months ago, in an attack on a Ukrainian educational academy for the military near Poltava. And there were a number of NATO officers there educating and training Ukrainians, large numbers of Swedes that had just joined this fray. They were killed. I think the Russians are going to target not only the weapon systems, but any foreign presence they find on the ground. And dodging a hypersonic missile with a couple of minutes notice, it's impossible. It's not going to happen. So wherever these systems show up, wherever they identify these systems as being, and they know that they're largely operated by contractors. Now, are these regular soldiers serving in the American, British, French, German militaries? I don't know. I think when this is over, at some point, we'll discover the numbers of Americans in uniform who were killed in Ukraine. We'll finally find that out. At least I hope so, along with British and Swedish and German and Dutch and so forth. But my point is, they're going to ratchet up the intensity of these strikes. And we're also going to see those glide bombs, which have turned out to be very, very destructive and very effective, used more frequently against the same kinds of targets, because Ukraine has no air defense. If people want to know what Europe would look like if the Russians decided to attack, they should look at Ukraine, because we have no such air and missile defense in NATO. We can protect at most 5% of our territory. Who are we kidding? We would be naked in the face of all these missiles and bombs. So look at what the Russians are doing. And now it doesn't take a lot of imagination to figure out what would happen to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Germany, all for nothing. It's not necessary, but they need to think about that. So did the 3 4-stars that you had on earlier. They're not thinking about that. They could care less. They're to go back to their offices, their homes, live in luxury, and forget all about it. Their paychecks continue to rise, and they get more and more cash in from the usual suspects for saying what they're doing. It's sad, but that's the way it is. But the people who are going to pay for this are going to be on the ground in Ukraine. Lavrov doesn't want this. Neither does President Putin. These are two very astute men, very clever, very intelligent. They do not emote. They respond with great clarity, crystal clear statements of what is going to happen. We're going to see a tremendous ratcheting up of intensity. And the other thing I think we're going to see is more rapid movement on the ground, which is why I think we're shipping over these landmines. And what is interesting to me about the landmines is that you'll remember when we were in the Gulf, we were horrified at the cluster munitions that children were picking up off the ground and losing arms or hands or something, or their sight, because they didn't realize that what looked like a little ball was an explosive. Yeah. And it was this tremendous crusade to get rid of those things. Well, we overcame that in Ukraine and have used those there. We also were horrified by landmines. Remember Princess Diana, who went into Africa in many places to expose what was going on there, the terrible damage inflicted on children in Africa. All of that has gone by the wayside, because once again, this has nothing to do with Ukraine. This is a small group of people who've hijacked our government, and they're not going away necessarily on 20 January, who want to harm Russia. That's it. And you've got a portion of that group that is just as interested in destroying Iran, sadly. So I see nothing good happening. And given what's happened in Ukraine thus far, I cannot imagine that the Russians will back down 1 inch from supporting Iran or Syria, or for that matter, the Turks, if they decide to weigh into this.
Well, let's certainly hope it doesn't get to that. I just really have to just keep fingers crossed and pray and hope that nothing happens between now and January 20th, and then that when the Trump administration comes in, that they put into effect many of the thoughts that you have. In fact, I want to highlight one thing that I really hope they adopt. It's a paper you've written recently. Gary, if you can toss up that screenshot that I had sent earlier from Doug's paper. I love the title, Taming the Warfare State. And one of the things you put in there is the objective is that by adopting a new grand strategy that prioritizes diplomacy and peaceful cooperation, the U.S. can gain a competitive edge in future warfare and strengthen national security. And that seems to be almost the opposite of what all these generals keep saying, that, no, we don't want to have diplomacy. We want to have more arms and more weapons and everything else. But you say that there's a different and better way to ensure national security. What's the gist of this paper?
I think the gist is as follows, that we've gone about as far as we can go with this 21st century or late 20th century version of gunboat diplomacy. Remember, I think gunboat diplomacy was a term coined originally by Prime Minister Palmerston, who was a very great first minister for the king in Great Britain, but it's a bad idea today. We don't live in a world of banana republics anymore. We have real nation states, viable governments, intelligent people out there. They may look different from us. They may live differently from us. They may practice different religions from us. But these are intelligent and capable people who know how to fight and will fight back. The idea of bludgeoning them every time they don't agree with us is a dead end. The good news is that everybody in the world, Dan, wants to do business with the United States. I include Russia and China. I include Iran, everyone. All the sanctions in the world are not going to stop that. We need to get rid of the sanctions. We need to walk away from the bullying tactics, walk away from the military bullying, as well as the sanctions, and get back to the notion that business is where we ought to be focused on, because our prosperity is really the foundation of our military power. And remember, Washington said when he left his office as president, he said, give this nation 20 years of peace, and it will be the most economically prosperous and powerful nation in the world. No one will want to challenge us. So instead of thinking about our military power as the key to deterring others from attacking us, think in terms of the prosperity, how important our prosperity is, not just to us, but to the rest of the world. We can be an engine of prosperity for the world. That's what we were 100 years ago. We can be that again. And that's where we should focus. But this demands change in the way we look at the world. And right now, this small group of people want us to see the rest of the world through a lens that suggests everyone is hostile to us. There are threats everywhere. Everyone hates us. Well, a lot of people don't like us, but that has a lot to do with what we've been up to for the last 30 years.
That's exactly right. Yeah, there's a reason why that is there. But listen, I can only hope, and I will certainly do everything I can to advocate this in the next administration with some of the folks that are coming in there that I think are very interested in acts like this. And I hope that President Trump himself is, because he does want prosperity for the United States and strength and security. And I think this is a far better path to get there than anything that anyone else is talking about right now. But we'll see how that goes. But for right now, really appreciate you coming on the show today. Appreciate you writing stuff like that, so that there is an alternative out there instead of more like those TV generals that we keep talking about. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
And we appreciate you guys for joining us today. Thank you very much. And we'll see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.